Well, I'm excited to introduce our speaker, colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Luke Macauly. He is at the UMD Extension. Luke started his, I guess, sort of career at Notre Dame in a liberal arts program and got a major in liberal arts and Spanish, which he's fluent in, but then worked 5 years in the Department of Justice, so not doing quail work. And then I guess had a career change and went off to get his master's in rangeland and wildlife management at UC Berkeley, and then ended up staying there for his PhD as well in rangeland and wildlife management. And then after getting his PhD, worked for University of California System Extension before coming over here to UMD in 2020 to be the wildlife specialist for UMD Extension. Luke does a lot of cool outreach. I've been involved in some of it. I don't know if you do it anymore, but every once in a while, do a pretty weekly or monthly education
Still do it. Yep.
lecture series for land managers and ranchers and farmers and stuff on wildlife management. Has a pretty good YouTube channel with lots of information, and also leads a student mentoring or new hunter program with Delta Waterfowl, taking out undergrads and grad students on their first waterfowl hunt in the winter. So if you see those emails going around, this is Luke who runs that program, and I got to go last year on that, which was a lot of fun. So lots of really cool wildlife outreach and work. Works in the sort of area of working landscapes, which we'll talk about today, but also deer management, and of course with Extension, lots of wildlife outreach. So excited to hear what he has to say today. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Travis. Thanks for the invitation. It's nice to come to campus. I'm not here too much. I'm based over at the Y Research and Education Center over on the Eastern Shore. I also work on a bunch of property, one large property over there that I've spent a lot of time working on. So a lot of my time gets pulled over there. I live in Southern Maryland. I'm on the road a lot, and I work all over the state. So my responsibilities as an extension specialist means I bring research that we do here and bring stuff from campus out to the public. Historically, this was farmers and ranchers. Now, and it traditionally used to be best agricultural practices. It's increasingly expanded to natural resource management. So I'm the first wildlife management specialist in extension for our program. So I got here and got to develop a program. And when I got here, I grew up in Texas and quail were gone. They had been extirpated from Central Texas. I guess, Travis, you may have seen them in certain places, but I've only seen them one time in Texas. I got here and I found out there's still some here in Maryland. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So I thought, got three main buckets I work on. There's a lot of farmers with crop damage from deer, so I help them a lot with crop damage, which is a very expensive problem in Maryland. Tens of millions of dollars are lost to that. But this is my real passion, is like improving habitat for wildlife and changing our landscapes to make them better. So let's dive in. So this work. Gotcha. That should do it. All right, cool. I'd like to give an outline so you can guys see how close we are to the end. So just start with a little background and talk about land cover and habitat, the habitat we need. And we'll talk, I'll pause. I'll say this is a lot on bobwhites, but bobwhites are a great umbrella species. They cover, if you can get bobwhites in the landscape, you're going to have great turkey populations. You can have great grassland bird populations. You're going to have a huge amount of diversity in the landscape. So we'll talk about what we need. What do we have on the landscape? And then where can we find space for species like the bobwhite? And there's going to cover three main land covers: forests, crops and hay and agriculture, and turf grass. Now I'll wrap up with some pretty interesting things. We've been working since I got here on acoustic monitoring. And these are these small devices you can program to record for whatever you like, 2 hours in the morning, every 10 minutes from sunset to sunrise. And we've put out 10 of these out on a property I'm managing over on the Eastern Shore, a 1,000-acre property, and really excited to share. After 4 years of working on this, I'm really excited to see this stuff starting to really coalesce and come together. So let's start in some background. So big picture, here's our energy pyramid, trophic pyramid. I pasted a little quail in here. So in terms of land cover and habitat, this is bottom level. The foundation of our trophic system is really key for wildlife. Of course, there's issues with predators as well, and predator populations have done very well in the last 50 years, 30, 40 years. And there's also these sort of issues coming from top down as well. So you have a bottom up issue and a top down. Most of my presentation, though, we'll focus on this sort of bottom up process in the habitat. So why quail and why bobwhites, why grassland birds? The Maryland Breeding Bird Survey has been conducted since 1966, and this data tracks significant changes in bird populations over time. So these are four main guilds of bird species. Here on the left, grass up the top, grasslands, successional shrubs, wetlands, and woodlands. Should I stay close to that mic for the audio? Okay. And the colors represent whether there's a statistically significant decrease, which is red, or a statistically significant increase, which is green. And so you can see just at a glance, our grassland birds are the ones that are, as a proportion of that guild, have declined most. Successional and shrub species have also declined second most. Our wetland birds are kind of roughly 50-50. Some have increased, some have declined, and our woodlands have generally done pretty good, with the gray being not a significant change over time. So if you look at the top 20, here's the top 20 bird species in decline, according to that breeding bird survey. Northern bobwhite leads the charge. It's the most declining bird in Maryland, followed by a lot of other sparrows. Meadowlarks have not done well. All the ones in green can use grasslands or early successional vegetation communities. Now, I'll dive into what those are a little bit. So bobwhites have been extirpated from much of Maryland. This map shows some potential populations. This one's a maybe. I'm not sure if this is real, if this is released birds. For people who like to release bobwhites, and they really complicate the efforts of knowing these real birds, because released birds will die. They will not form self-sustaining populations. So we have some possibility of some wild birds here. We're still investigating that, but and these circles are bigger than reality. There's like one property here that has bobwhites on it. There's a couple, there's low densities here. This is one of the highest densities, and down here in the lower shore, we have decent populations. So what is early successional vegetation or early successional habitat? This is a model of succession. Many of you probably remember this from your basic ecology training. But if there's some widespread disturbance, a big forest fire comes through and sort of levels everything, you can start this process. If you leave that undisturbed for a period of 20, 50, 100 years, you start getting a regrowth over time. It starts with grass, and then you start getting wildflowers and forbs, and then you start getting the shrubs, and then more mature forests. And bobwhites really like this early successional period. So they are a disturbance-dependent species. And this model is really, I'm working on creating a new one with an Illustrator right now, but this is the model. But I'd like to kind of start brainstorming, like, there's more to it than just this, because some places, if you had two fires, if you had a fire every 15 years, you would have a very different kind of forest than if it was just left alone. And if you had fires every 5 years, you'd end up with very different vegetation communities. So, and you could have a lot of different structural types of forests that will result from these different disturbances. Here's another image of the same thing. And why do we care about having a diversity of forest types? Well, a lot of different, if you like biodiversity, which a lot of us do, a lot of these different bird species, and birds are an indicator. I think it will mimic closely diversity of insects, diversity of mammals. If you have a diversity of habitats, you'll have a diversity of animals on the landscape. So what we have in Maryland, and the reason why I first started out talking about forests is, in general, our forest age classes in Maryland are relatively mature. They're between 60 to 100 years old. I think the majority of our forests are in this age class right here. These two age classes here. This is 60 to 80. This is 80 to 100. This is from the Maryland's Forest Service Forest Action Plan. It's hard to say how accurate it is, where did they get this data, but that's the best thing I can find as far as what our age distribution is on our structure. But the Forest Service consistently notes that we have sort of a bottleneck in this age class of forests. Why does that matter? Well, historically, we may have had in Maryland, this is a project from Guyette et al. 2012. They went and looked at tree rings. They took cores of 300-year-old trees, and they can look at the rings and see if there's a fire starting. They can count how many fire starters there are in these ancient trees. And they've come up across the country, and they've come up with this map to estimate how frequently fire would have been historically on the landscape. And in much of Maryland, which is we are right here, these orange and this darker orange, puts us in about every 4 to 12 years in most of Maryland would have had fire come through. So that kind of lays the groundwork, and we'll talk about now What is this habitat? What does this early successional habitat look like? I like to share a lot of pictures. So um, here's a planting we did at the Hawaii Research and Education Center. We were trying to put in pollinator and quail habitat, and it's a pretty good description of what they need. It's not a grassland, really. You have some native grasses here, but you also have a lot of wildflowers. This is late bone set. A lot of mare's tail coming up in here. A lot of different diversity of plants in this area. And another thing you have is that quail really need is bare ground. You can't really see it here, but there's areas in between these plants where small chicks can move. And that turns out to be pretty important. And we call them grasslands, but I got this from Bob Long at DNR. He's the upland game bird biologist. He's like, we really need to be thinking about forelands. We should be calling these forelands because that's really what we need. For a long time, 10, 15 years ago, we were planting a lot of native grasses, native warm season grasses, but they're not great for diversity, not great for a lot of wildlife. It's monoculture, thatch, versus what we're planting now, which has a lot of different variation of species in it. And these forbs bring a lot more pollinators. They have created very different structure at the ground level for a lot of different wildlife, especially quail and turkeys. And they are producing seeds. So they put seeds out and birds eat seeds. Here's an example. This is Nanticoke Wildlife Management Area on the lower shore. They have wild quail out here. It just gives you an example of what this kind of landscape looks like. We have eastern red cedars that provide that shrubby component that they also depend on. Here's another example of this is a farm buffer at the Hawaii Research Station. I'll point out some of the species here, goldenrod. You see just all the diversity and structure and color on this landscape. I like to put this slide in here. You can shrub cover and what they call dive bomb cover. So for one of the issues with bobwhites is when raptor populations recovered so well, it increased that pressure on these populations. So it really made having habitat like this on the ground really important for them to hide from predators. This also goes for rabbits, turkeys, and I speak a lot about game species, but there's all these other species that depend on rabbits, for example, or turkeys. Here's another picture of some of that shrubby. It's a little bit hard to see, but this is in the winter. This is a lot of blackberry. It's a blackberry patch. And I stopped on the side of the road and took this picture because it had just snowed last year. And you can see there's snow on the ground here, but under these brambles, it had held up a lot of the snow off the ground. And so animals can still get to seeds and food resources under these shrubby areas where it melts faster because of the thermal characteristics of these shrub areas. So quail, as I mentioned earlier, are disturbance dependent. And we have 4 main disturbances that are really key, and I'll go through each of them. So prescribed burning is really an important tool. They're nicknamed the Firebird. Henry Stoddard down in Georgia, some people suggested he should have been named the father of modern wildlife management instead of Aldo Leopold. Aldo Leopold actually said he thought Stoddard should have gotten that title. He did a lot of work, and he nicknamed them the Firebird because he noticed quail would come in right after these burns. This is a burn we did out at Point Pleasant Farm, the property I'll talk about towards the end. And why is fire so important? So this is a great illustration of the diversity of that fire brings to the landscape. You can burn something like this, and oftentimes you'll have areas that don't burn that well. So here's an example of a mosaic where you burned a field, and these patches burned. And maybe there's some wet spots, or it was patchy, not enough wind. But if you do that over time, you end up getting areas that are burned multiple times every year. Some areas don't get burned at all. Some only get burned once. So you end up with a very patchy distribution on the landscape. A lot of diversity of structure also brings diversity of habitat for a lot of them. Hey, Jennifer. Disking. Disturbance like disking helps to create bare ground on the soil and can reset this sort of successional process. Historically, what may have mimicked this, we used to have large grazers on the landscape. We used to have bison, elk. Even before, back in the 10,000 years ago, we had mammoths and mastodons and things like that may have probably caused some pretty heavy disturbances on the ground. So this is another tool in the toolbox. Herbicide. This is a form of disturbance. It's a modern one. It's a lot of times it's hard to get a fire burn, and there's a lot of not only paperwork but also mobilization of resources on time when the weather is right. So sometimes herbicide is a great tool. We used a drone to reset this high tide bush and sweet gums that were really invading into this meadow, and we wanted to keep it as an early successional habitat. And then grazing, and there's not a lot of people. I'd love to do a research project on how grazing can be a tool for keeping that succession back. There's not a lot of grazing on the eastern shore. There's more out west in the western part of the state. But I took this picture to show these goats are in here grazing, and they're in the same pasture with all this tall brush, but they haven't taken that all down. So having a certain type of grazing that's managing for diversity and leaving some cover on the landscape is really important. I will say you might see cattle pastures with nice green grass. Oftentimes that's fescue, and full season grass is not native. Doesn't really provide much. It will provide habitat for things like meadowlarks and grasshopper sparrows to some extent, but not great for quail. So just to review those things: burning, disking, herbicide, and grazing. And you might be wondering, what about mowing? And mowing is, I share this with a lot of landowners, so I try to give them practical tips. So like, here's what you can do: don't mow in summer, because that's when these birds are nesting in these grasslands. And if you mow during the nesting season, you might not actually hit the nest itself, but you are leaving it completely exposed. And if anybody's ever seen a hayfield after they've done the first cut, you see crows and vultures and foxes running around right behind the tractor, eating everything up like these eggs. So if you're going to mow, mowing right around now until April 15th, when they start nesting, a lot of birds start nesting again, is a great time. It leaves winter cover, big messy area, leaves warmth and thermal cover in the winter. So that's kind of what we need, bobwhites need. So what do we have in the landscape? This is kind of an example of some of what we have. This is actually Delaware, BC's farm fields, forests, forests, some development mixed in. In Maryland, this is the Chesapeake Conservancy land cover database. I think it's the best land cover map for the state. It's, I think, 1 meter resolution. So if you're doing like GIS work, it's a great data set to use. But we consolidated some of the categories. There's a lot of different ways to cut it, but we generally have forest is our largest single land cover in the state, 46%, cropland second, develops third, turf grass is our 4th largest land cover in the state, which is kind of kills me. I feel like we have huge opportunities to convert this into much higher quality habitat and reduce expenses and costs for people. And then pasture and hay is orange here. If you look at these top 4, besides develop, we'll cut out develop. We'll say we're just not going to worry about that. 77% of the landscape is in these 4 land cover types. So I'll talk about each of those and how we might try and find space for bobwhites and the other species that need that kind of habitat. Here's some more examples of what we have. This is a natural resource management area. I live near it down in Calvert County. The boundaries are right about here. We have farm field and we have forest, mature forest, farm fields, and mature forest. This is the Patuxent Research Refuge. I think there's a road there named Quail Lane. I was trying to find on a map, we put it on there. There's no quail here anymore. They used to do research back in the 60s on quail, and they did a quail diet research study there. They're gone. I'm pretty sure there's no quail there. And you just look at the just sort of overwhelming cover of forest, which is fine. Forests are cool. I like forest birds. I like walking through forests, but just thinking about what are the sort of priorities and things we want to manage for. One thing that kind of also kills me is that probably the one largest aspect of early successional habitat in the whole research refuge is this power line. I really look at power lines now as like some of the best habitat we have left, which is kind of crazy. So there are several meadows here on the property, but certainly they're sort of isolated islands, and it's very hard for, if you're familiar with metapopulation management, it's very hard for populations to survive when they're so isolated like that, especially for a boom bust bird like quail. They're known to have very low survival rates. 35% will live a year. So 65% will die every year. So you have very high mortality rates. They make up for it with very high reproductive rates. So you can have these boom bust cycles. The 5 million tree initiative is also an issue that I went and we were looking for bobwhites here in Southern Maryland. This is at Spice Creek NRMA. And I was kind of disappointed to see like this is some of the last grassland areas we have left within 5 miles, and it was planted in with trees, which is fine. But I like to think about what's missing on the landscape, and we're moving into more and more trees. So we're working a lot to try and like bring education about small trees, shrubs, and early successional habitats. And I worked with Daniel Pratson and a few others to get this publication out in review right now, just to say, when we're doing tree plantings, can we include hazelnuts and dogwoods and all these other species that are low-lying shrubs that are going to provide some different types of cover than just the trees that have been all the way planting, which tend to grow up into large forests. So let's talk about where we can find space, and some of this might be a little bit controversial, so let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback. This is a forest at Point Pleasant Farm. A lot of our forests might look like this. This is a pine-dominated one. But you can see you walk through there and you don't have to worry about getting really any ticks because there's nothing brushing up on your pants. There's no understory here. This is where a bobwhite would go to die. Cooper's hawks love forests. Cooper's hawks have very easy viewpoint on anything living in here: turkey poults, rabbits, anything that nests on the ground. A lot of ground nesting birds, whippoorwills, and others have very little ability to make it in this environment. There's some practices called timber stand improvement. This is from the National Deer Association, and they go through and they thin out the forest and create this giant understory bedding area. This is created for deer, but it also is a place for turkeys in there or for quails in there. It's not ideal for quails, a little too grown up, but if they're in there, they're not going to be a sitting duck. Here's an example over at Nasawongo, property down in the lower shore. The Nature Conservancy manages like 10,000, 15,000 acres. It's a huge property. They do thinning and they do burning. And they've created this sort of understory. You don't see many forests like this on our landscape. You can go to even further extreme. This is at another property on closer over towards Cambridge. And they've thinned even more. This is almost a savanna. You rarely will see anything like this on the landscape as well. And then I also like to destigmatize a little bit clear cuts, and this is partly the part where it gets controversial. This is mostly a clear cut that was performed just the previous winter. And you can see the regeneration of all the grasses and plants coming in here. Here's another one that the Maryland Forest Service conducted. They left a few seed trees behind. But what comes back, they recovered very quickly. And what's coming back here is this is Devil's Walking Stick in red. You see all the different colors in here. Devil's Walking Stick in the fall is a fantastic pollinator species. I've seen swallowtail butterflies just mob their flowers in late summer. So what about forest interior dwelling species birds? Has anybody ever heard of FIDs? This is kind of a big concern. This is a June 2000 publication that kind of like laid out like how we think we should manage forest interior dwelling birds. And in it, they have this list of about, I think there's 25 species listed as FIDs. And they have guidances for what the way you should try to do development or how to build homes in this environment. And their overall recommendation, as you can see here, this is guidelines are not followed because it moved into the forest. This is better. You don't want to have edges. You don't want to have any trees in between. You want to have everything condensed and very, very thick forest around it. And I look at this and I think, gosh, there's a lot of species that like this. I mean, I'll go into a few of them. Scarlet tanagers, I find in my backyard in an environment a little bit like this. Even though they're on the list here as a FID right here at the bottom. So we went through this and I thought there's got to be more to this story. So I went through and I've got a student actually doing a literature review. If anybody likes to do background research, wants to do some work, Joshua Johnson's a big birder, and he's going through these and trying to see, well, what do these birds that are on that list actually need? And it turns out I bolded the ones that actually, when you look at the research, and there's been quite a bit of research since 2000, a lot of them benefit from young forests or need young forests. They needed gaps, canopy gaps, small little openings in the story, in the understory, mature forest with an understory. So we have a lot of species. And if you add all these up, 15 of the 25 species will either need an understory, some early successional vegetation at some point, especially when they're fledging their young. So they'll find like cerulean warblers, for example, will be out in the forest and they'll move towards forest openings when they have young because they're looking for insects to feed their young, their chicks. They need high protein insects to feed. So they're moving towards these spots. Young forests are also really important in canopy gaps. And this is the first time I've kind of presented this. This is a paper that the Old Growth Forest Network helped to put together. And they have this sort of model. Well, historically, this was all forests. I hear this a lot. And I like to think like, well, we don't really know. We have some settlers' accounts. We have John Smith's journals to work from. His journals describe like being able to drive a carriage through the woodlands of the area. So they've just been very widely spaced trees, maybe something like a savanna. But it's really hard to know. We have very patchy knowledge of the history. So I like to have a little bit of humility about what we do know. So, but the model is that, the idea of meadowlarks and bobolinks and quail as well would have fit in here. They peaked in the 1800s and 1900s and they're declining now back to what historically would have been. So they really didn't belong here anyways. So I was looking at this model, I was like, where's the data for this? And they said they adopted it from Foster et al. So I went over to Foster et al. And I found out Foster et al. Has this model they built it on, but it also has this model here. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So that's actually coming from two books that I have not purchased yet, but there's a Massachusetts book and a New England wildlife book that suggests maybe there was something in between. And yes, we did have this spike of, as widespread clearing happened, we would have had a boom of certain species and a decline as a result of reforestation. So there's just, I think, there's evidence out there that suggests there's debate. There's debate about what the historical picture used to be. And I think it's important just to have some of that context in mind. So now what can we do with crops and hay? So we have a lot of farmland. It's the second largest land use in Maryland. So I think about what can we do to make these areas more conducive to wildlife. Now I'm really an optimist. I think we have huge opportunities here in the state. We can have biodiversity and keep agriculture and keep like a really wonderful, expansive rural community. So I'll go through a few things that I think we can do. A lot of our farms, this is a farm in Delaware. I work with Joe Street. I've done a lot of research on his property over the years, and he's got these trees that overhang his forests. So, I mean, from an agricultural producer's perspective, this is also not great because these trees are shading the crop. And believe it or not, their roots are extending under here. And I wouldn't have believed this as a competition issue, really. But until when it gets dry, and I've seen actually at the Central Maryland Rec, where it had been like a week or two without rain, it's pretty hot. All these soybeans were wilted, and the ones in the middle in full sun were fine. And I was like, dang, the tree roots are sucking water down out of the bottom. So they're sucking water from the edge too. So it was really weird because I thought, oh, they're shaded, they'd do better. But in the center, those were fine. So there's competition going on with these trees. So something a farmer could do or a landowner could do, and this is almost even more forest management practice, but you could set back that edge. This is called edge feathering. It's Chuck Richardson down in Southern Maryland did this and pushed this back, and he created all this buffer around the edge of his field, just diversified what was available in the landscape. Hay fields are, I think, unfortunately, I'm friends with farmers and I totally respect their need to make a livelihood from the land, but hay fields are one of the hardest types of agriculture, I think, on wildlife because birds are nesting in them. So, and that nesting season coincides perfectly with the first cut of a hay field, and that's the most valuable cut. So it's really rough on a lot of wildlife, not only birds, but you have rabbits nesting in there. You have turkeys, of course, are bird. Turtles will be on these fields. A lot of them get hit. Deer. Nobody really cares about killing deer, it seems like these days, but it does kill a lot of fawns. It kind of sucks. Nobody needs to have like needless loss of life. So we put together, I worked with Jenny Freeberry, who was a master's student here. I graduated and we worked on a publication for wildlife friendly hay practices. And there's a lot of things you can do around the edges to improve your hay practices. So biggest one, which is not economical, is to just delay your cutting until July 15th. If you can go that far, if you go to July 1st, 2/3 of those birds will fledge and they'll be able to survive. But if you go to July 15th, even better. 90% of birds will have fledged by then. There's some other agricultural things we work around with the edge. We can still have agriculture. And this is at Washington College, runs a great program called the Natural Lands Project. And they've inserted early successional vegetation in the middle of their center pivot system. So they're trying to connect quail habitat out here over into this section over here. Fallowing. I'll show a map a little bit later. At the Point Pleasant farm, we have fallowed a lot of the fields. This is a second-year fallow. We didn't plant a thing. And we have blue vervain coming in here. We have a lot of native plants. This might be milkweed. Because all this diversity comes in just by fallowing, just letting it go. Now that comes with the cost, but oftentimes landowners aren't farming really for the income. It's not the biggest source of income for them. If you buy land farming, you cannot pay for land with farming. I'll just say that. So you can pay for maybe 1 month's mortgage payment for farming. So it's not the biggest for somebody who owns land, sometimes it might not be the biggest thing. So some things they can do is just fallow fields and let them go for a few years. And then you can put them back into production, you can rotate them. And insecticides, a lot of our farmers and producers are using integrated pest management, but it's really sometimes pyrethroids are a really cheap solution to solving insect issues. And there's no as far as I know, there's no real good data on how much pyrethroids are being sprayed on the landscape. A lot of times it's like $1 an acre, $2 an acre to be just throw the bottle in the tank when they're spraying the herbicides. They kill all the insects and they don't have to worry about insect damage. It's not a best practice, but it does, I think it does happen to quite a big extent. So to the extent that you can reduce these sort of broad spectrum insecticides on the landscape, another cool thing I like to just share with farmers. Also, I know landowners who are super into wildlife, they will try to get seeds. They try to get, if they're planting corn, they ask their farmer, I don't want coated seeds. There's neonicotinoid coated seeds. I don't want that plant on my property. A lot of farmers give a lot of pushback, and it's hard to find seeds that aren't coated. If you have specialty providers to find that. There's also BT corn, which we had a great talk by Kelly Hamby, who's a professor in the entomology department, and it's up on our YouTube channel. We've had one of our monthly, she was our monthly speaker back in October, and she said you could get 3 or 4 years with no yield losses without insecticides until the pests start to regenerate and come back, because it's so widespread in the landscape. We've pretty much nuked a lot of the pest species, so you can get away with several years without these insecticides before you might need to use them. So turf grass, I took this picture. There's a little old lady here mowing this giant, like multi-acre lawn. There's a lot of places in Maryland with big open lawns. And I would say maybe ex-urban landscapes and suburban landscapes, I can understand it's a little bit harder, smaller lots. There's a lot of lots here that are multi-acres and people are just mowing and mowing and mowing. This is in Calvert County. And it just kills me to see just like all the expense and time and effort to just be mowing all this, and you could just you could still have a lawn. I have part of my yard in a lawn. It's nice to have kids playing it, stuff like that. Throw a ball for your dog, but you could just open this up to a lot of great habitat. And even by just killing this non-native fescue, allowing the seed bank to regenerate. We have conservation programs here that are, we pay farmers to put in cool season grasses around the buffers. This was a big practice. We still do pay them for this, but this is not great habitat for many wildlife species. It's sod forming grass. Chicks, when they're forming, well, first off, they're sitting ducks because there's not a lot of cover and there's nowhere for them to walk. That bare ground in that first picture I sent you is really important for them to be able to navigate these areas. And it's not just in farm, it's not just around people's homes. It's like I bike around in rural areas and I see people are mowing around their tobacco barns in the middle of summer. It's just all over the place. So I found this property owner just such a cool example of just letting they have their lawn, let that part of it go. So what can we do to bring quail back? This is a lot of my big long-term objective is, I think the biggest thing is increase knowledge, expand those existing populations. And I have multiple landowners who've done the work and they've gotten quail back on their property, along with a whole lot of other species. For those who are far from wild populations, this is a lot. This is probably most of Maryland. They're too far to get natural colonization. These birds will move, the record is 6 miles, is dispersal distance. That's the longest known dispersal. So if you're more than a few miles from existing populations, you're kind of out of luck. So then you're looking at reintroductions. This is something I think we'll be looking into in the future and future years. But you really need a lot of area of prime habitat. If you're going to go through the expense of trapping and releasing wild birds, you want to make sure you have when you release them, they're going to run, and you want to make sure they land in good habitat. Speak about the importance of public and private partnerships. I think working together with the private landowners and public areas as well to make this happen. So I'll close with the section on this really cool acoustic monitoring. And I think this is like going to be next generation stuff to be tracking our wildlife. And I'm really excited about how far we've come on this. This is an audio mod. There's several different models out there, there's song meters and others, but we put these in plastic bags. They've got cases too, but we found these have a little bit better audio come into them. And you get these spectrograms and you can detect calls and use machine learning to find these patterns on the calls. And we can run through hundreds of hours of recordings in a matter of 15 minutes, half an hour, and be able to identify all the different species that we're picking up. This is what bobwhites look. We did. There's no really good classifier for bobwhites, so we developed our own. Took a long time. We've been working on this for 4 years, and many times I thought, is this worth doing? Are we going to be able to succeed at this? But I'm glad I stuck with it because it's really cool what's coming out of this. Not only can you detect birds, there's frogs, owls, they're a bird, but other sounds, insect noises and things like that. So this is the Point Pleasant farm I was mentioning throughout this talk. It's about a 1,000-acre property, and they contacted University of Maryland College of Natural Resources and said, "Hey, we've got this property, and we'd like someone to work on it." And everybody was busy, too busy to pick it up. And landed on my desk. I was like, I want to check this out. So formed an agreement with them for a 5-year contract to work with them on this property. And we deployed 10 of these recorders about 2 years, almost 2 years ago on the property. And we tried to match them, about half of them in hedgerows and open habitats and half of them in forests. And so the darkness of the color I'll point out is the species richness. So it's interesting stuff is this forest, which we are looking at getting timbered in this year, has relatively low diversity. We had the Talbot Bird Club come out every month, and they come out and they listen for birds and they bird watch, and they don't spend a lot of time in our woods. They're like, there's just not much there. It's too decadent. So they're excited about the timber harvest that we're going to be doing. Here's an image of the property. You see that early successional. This is just fallow, 2 years fallow, and you get this great, these are native broom sedge, bunch grasses are coming in on their own. And we are implementing want to keep agriculture. I think agriculture is an important tool. It's nice to have a farmer on your property who can do things. So we had a little bit different layout. We're now in the planning for this layout for how we'll do farming. The green is going to be habitat. The yellow is going to be farming. So we're going to have dispersed farming and habitat side by side. I think they're going to really complement each other pretty nicely. And I'm working with him on like making sure he's not spraying insecticides and trying not to use BT corn and all this other stuff. So really, it's kind of challenging because a lot of them, they have their production goals. And so it's a process to get to know them and build that trust. So here's the data. So I should have pulled up online so I could run through this live, but the different colors are different bird species. And the height of the bars is the number of calls they picked up on the day. So each of these is a separate day all the way across. And we started in, I think, this is April 2024. We've got a batch of bad batteries here. It sucks. So we have a hole in our data. But I was so excited when we ran this. And I looked at this, I was like, wow, this was the first year we had fallowed, so the fields hadn't really grown up much. And this is the second year after fallowing. You just see this, just at a glance, this notable increase of bird calls. Don't necessarily say abundance because you can't say, but it's pretty clear to me that if you have more calls, you probably have more birds. And on this web platform, which I might try and pull up if we have some time at the end, if you hover over any of these colors, it'll tell you the species, and you click on it, go to the call. But I thought I'd share some of the individual species that we detected. American kestrels back in 24, we had this many. 25, we had a big jump. Eastern meadowlarks, one of those, I think they're 5th top declining bird. We had a few in 24, and they've really bumped up. The different colors here are different sites, so they're different locations. So we can also quickly see, okay, where are they? Then we can start managing for them. Scarlet tanagers, I mentioned earlier, they are considered aphids, but they will use edge habitats as well. And we've had them substantially increase. We have some pretty good peaks there. So in summary, I'll talk about the habitat we need is that early successional vegetation. Young forests are key. Whippoorwills. We don't hear whippoorwills here anymore. There used to be whippoorwills here. You can go out west and catch them still. Understory, canopy gaps, I think, are important. What do we have? We have mature forests, crops, development, turfgrass, hay pasture. I think there's a lot of room in each of these to make some improvements. So in our forests, I think huge opportunity. You can make money from doing timber harvest in a lot of cases. So it's I think an easy win-win to improve the diversity and structure of your forests. I don't want to clear cut all our forests, but I just want us to manage them so we have diversity. Crops and hay, I think we have ability to adjust practices. Turf grass, I think we can reduce mowing, convert it back to native grasslands, reduce the inputs. And then in terms of tracking, I think we have huge opportunities to have evidence-based management. I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes back after our forest. How much does it set back our birds after we timber that woods on the end? And with that, I will close. This is my email address. I have this habitat guide. If you're curious about quail habitat, I got a bunch of copies of this afterwards. And here's my email list. This is where you get the notifications. A couple of reminders on email. Grab it anytime. Thank you.
Really interesting. But I'm back what happened? Were you in after July there?
I'm sorry.
That drop that happened.
This? Yeah, I think these are migratory patterns. So you have summer birds moving out and winter birds moving in. So this is the summer period where you have a big peak. And then these red ones, I believe, are Canada geese. So you have this migrating of Canada geese coming in. So you're going to see that happening. I forget what the light purple are. I can pull this up in a minute. But yeah, you have certain blocks, or also maybe a bird creates a nest right by one of our recorders. So you have like 500 calls because they're just calling a lot right at that spot. So yeah.
I didn't really have a question, I just wanted to.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Is there any way to tell like distance from the receiver on these? Because for like Canada geese, I hear them flying over all the time, but they're not necessarily like staying.
Yeah. Probably ways in which you could detect like how loud the sound was. It gets pretty complicated because it can get influenced by wind, noise, background noise, rain. So it could sound like it's faint even though it's might be close. So at this time, and there's some really great cutting edge stuff going on where folks are trying to even put a lot of reporters on one field, and then they can triangulate based on like where it's louder, and even the milliseconds difference between for the sound to arrive at the reporter to the other reporter, they can actually find out, okay, where is that bird in the field? And then they can start saying, okay, that's the same bird. Now we can count individuals, so we can say that's one bird instead of like multiple birds. So there's also some other cutting edge stuff that I'll think about in a minute, but they're really cool tool.
Could you pull up the?
The web app?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. And I put a link right here so I could do this easily. It's currently, we're optimizing it now for speed. And it is more hide video panel. There we go. So I think we have 1 million clips in here. So it takes it like about 30 seconds to load. So while that loads, I'll take another question. Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, about power lines, it's because you can potential benefit.
Mhm.
Is there any chance to partner with the power?
Yeah, we have tried, and it's, we've tried, we got close with BG&E. They had like a habitat manager, and he just went dark on us. So it was hard to get their contact because it's a giant organization. So we called and called and called. Finally got somebody, he wanted to do it, and then he just disappeared. So it's definitely an opportunity. And I think one of the biggest things, the simplest things they can do is just stop mowing and transfer. And this sounds crazy, but to a lot of folks, like start using herbicides instead to kill trees. So, because then you leave the structure on the landscape and you don't end up mowing. The mowing is one of the harder things on them. So, and there's companies that are doing that. Integrated Vegetation Management is a company that has several power line contracts on the Eastern Shore, and he's always promoting trying to just shift to herbicides rather than mowing.
First, is there a species management plan for this species? And secondly, I didn't hear you talk at all about genetic diversity, and I'm just wondering how much that is being discussed with it. I mean, it seems like the populations that exist are pretty isolated from each other, so genetic exchange might be an issue. And I was wondering, in terms of management decisions, how much that's entering into management plan.
Right. Not an expert on the genetic question, but let me first answer. A species management plan, not that I know of, exists specifically for bobwhites. They are a species of greatest conservation need in the SWAP, in the State Wildlife Action Plan. But I don't see a whole lot of like dedicated effort just for that species. But the other question on genetics, from what I recall, it's been a little bit since I looked into this, is there seems as though there was so much movement of birds over the years that they think that there's a lot of mixing happening. I've not heard of any concerns about like genetic like inbreeding happening. Could be an issue, but I've not heard that be a topic. So here's our little website. And so here, yeah, anything you want to check out. So you hover over this and I'll tell you there's our blue jays. And we just integrated this other really cool thing right down here, where we can pick a species. I pick Carolina chickadee. I know this one works. We just integrated in a callback thing. So you can actually go to the clip and play it, because we had this first, we have a contract with DNREC in Delaware to run this, and we developed it. And a lot of times it's like, well, is that a false positive? And you definitely have false positives, you have false negatives. So you have false positives when it says there's something there and it's not actually that bird. False negatives when it's like misses a bird that was actually calling. So we can look at Carolina chickadees. Here you can see when you click it, this is all the Carolina chickadees calling across the property. Again, this is one of those I suspect there's a nest right there by the recorder that day or something. It doesn't fit with nesting. There's something going on where there's a chickadee constantly chirping right there at that spot. But we can hit play on this spectrogram here, and it might take it a second to start. Oh, do we have audio?
That's a good question.
Oh, muted it. It's at 100. But it will play, and you can hear a Carolina chickadee, and it's super cool. And so for some birds, like let me try this little thing.
Yeah, it's all right.
Okay. Sorry, but it's really nice. And like species like American woodcock, which we don't have many of, we only had a few calls on the property. I was like, and sometimes I'm like, when it's only a few calls, I think it's probably a false positive. But went to it, and it was like, oh, we got a woodcock there. So it's pretty neat. And then we know where it is. So now the birders, the Talbot Bird Club loves it because they're like, we're going there and we're going to find woodcock. So
You have a good imitation?
the woodcock, yeah.
You tried the new pups? Have you tried those?
No,
We're
these
about to deploy those. Have you seen them?
yeah, these ones are live. They have like a cell.
And they use AI. Well, you can pay a prescription. You don't have to. Subscription.
Mm-hmm.
You but they'll do it for you.
Mhm.
USGS is using them now and loves them. And so I was because this looks great. I was curious if you'd use them.
Haven't used them yet. We stuck with our acoustic. I looked into them and it seems like they could work. We're actually trying to develop our own little ones because it's like, let's just get, if we got what we're trying to have a prototype because I think this is where it's all going. I mean, I think there's going to be like, you had trail cameras and there's cell phone enabled trail cameras. And now it's that I feel like we have cell phone enabled acoustic recorders that give you live data and you could have a live data stream of what's calling on your property. So I think that's where it's going. So,
Well,
yeah.
let me know how they are.
Yeah, for sure.
Really expensive.
No, surprisingly, but there's a data fee, just like anything that you're gonna, if you choose to not have it just record on the device and you go download it, to less than $200.
Yeah. So the nice thing about audio costs like $75.
Yeah, they're pretty cheap. You know, but the labor of going out and checking them, they'll last about 45 days and can record about that much time. So, yeah.
I was thinking about the power line fields too, Paul. Actually, I was gonna ask that same question. But your response gave me a further question about solutions for the power lines, because I actually live right by one up in Howard County. And we call it a wildlife highway. I mean, you can really see that they do it twice a year mowing. And I have a feeling that many of my neighbors would be averse to spraying herbicides because it is their populated area as well. So I'm wondering, are there any other, I mean, burning probably wouldn't work. Is there anything else that people are thinking of to maybe?
Disking and grazing, we had the 4 burning is, I agree, not a no-go usually under a power line. But you have disking, grazing are the other 2 disturbances. Mowing once or twice a year is not terrible. It's not the worst, especially the time it well outside of, August. A lot of times folks will mow in August and usually around August 15th, like the official end of the breeding season. So you're not going to kill any nesting birds. And you will have some regrowth happen before it goes into winter, but sometimes not a whole lot. So kind of just going down to once a year is great because then you leave a lot of cover on the ground. Now you do still have saplings and stuff starting to grow and they become more vigorous without more regular mowing. But
Start that. Or
grazing,
goat grazing.
yeah. I think grazing's a tool. I think sometimes like they might not like it's all tricky because like I don't know enough about how much they'll take down certain types of shrubs or certain types of trees. I've heard goats love sweet gums, which are probably one of the biggest pioneer trees that we get into these areas. So I think just like you really need to dive into like, yeah, how do these animals, the particular animal graze, what do they get after? Cattle might not do much for some of this, they might do okay. So that's, I think, something I'd like to work on eventually. So.
The power lines and then this like the just forgot the name of the university out there across the bridge that had the farm in their picture.
Washington College.
Washington College. Like those are like small linear little corridors. Are the Quail actually using these like small skinny corridors like power lines and
power lines? I think not so much because it's again, you got trees on both sides of those things and it's just like hawk perches. So one of the things that like if you're managing, like we're going to be managing trying to bring back quail. So we're going to try to remove that's our main objective. So we're going to remove trees out of our hedgerows. because the trees are hawk perches. And so it makes it very easy for them to sit there and scan for anything underneath and get it. So removing trees is one of those tools. So when you have trees on both sides of the power line, it's like you have snipers sitting up at the edges, just being able to watch. And I've seen actually in an area like that, I've seen turkeys. I was out deer hunting and the turkeys came out and they were walking around and I saw the mother with her poults who were pretty big at this point. And she came out and she's just doing this. She turned her head sideways and was like looking up at the tops of the trees, like watching for hawks for her little ones. The little ones just didn't care, they're dummies. But it was pretty, it was really fascinating to see her just scanning the treetops, watching. So
And my second question is, you're talking about how you need like a mosaic of habitat, like particularly with these like little meadows, little big meadows, right? But then when you were talking about the relocations, so it seems like you just need like these little meadows, little patches that would help bring in the good quail habitat. But then when you're talking about sort of like the relocations, with the reintroductions, you need 1,000 acres of prime habitat.
yeah.
But like, what's the prime habitat? The small patch, or a certain amount of patches within a landscape? Like, could you see like houses in sort of Western Montgomery County that have these big yards providing enough habitat to support quail across a landscape?
I think it's, well, let me answer your first. Yeah. Yeah. Let me add to the first question I didn't finish on the power lines. I think they could be better habitat if we pushed the forest back and made them wider. And so Bob Long, who's the upland game bird biologist, they used to talk a lot about buffers, and they're starting to think like you really need like full fields. So we're patching agriculture with fields because I think there's a role for agriculture. And in that study at Patuxent Refuge, quail were eating soybeans and corn from the agriculture that was going on there at the time. So I think it's a tool to like add diversity in the landscape. But I mean, if your prime habitat would be, I mean, if you really just want to have quail, Bob Long says this, quail do not need anything taller than 6 feet tall. So he would like really move towards removing trees. I think there is a role, especially in winters. Our winters, like there is some evidence that Cedar Swamp over in Delaware, they're finding their quail are using some of the forested areas. So I think thinned forests could be a part of that, but it would be, you wouldn't want to have any forests that are kind of close canopy, no understory. You'd want to have any of your woods, you'd want to have very strong understory components in them, like we saw at Nasawango. Um, Strong hedgerows, you need shrub component, that's a requirement. And then grasslands with a strong forb component. And a lot of people will break out like the grassland component to the brood rearing habitat. And the brood rearing is like for raising chicks, and you got it to have quail, you have to be able to raise chicks successfully. So a lot of times they'll, like, here's an example of, you could have one of those grasslands and you could disc the perimeter 15, 20 feet and have a lot of native weeds will come into those disked areas quickly. They like the disturbance. It's like ragweed, partridge pea, and have those, and those provide like a canopy over the top, and they put a lot of good seeds and they attract insects. So they can be underneath a ragweed patch, walk around on bare dirt that was disked, be able to pick up insects and forage, and then move back into the thicker cover for nesting. So it would be, I think there's a role for some forests, but I would say I feel like in a lot of properties, like I'm working with a property owner, he's got 1,000 acres and it's 80% wooded and 20% open. I was like, you kind of got to flip that. I think you could have 20% wooded and 80% open, and then you can have a pretty good habitat for quail, which is rough. It's hard to do. Suburban areas, I think they could. I'd probably look at like the matrix around it. I think like more exurban where you have like homes on like 3 to 5 acre lots or something like that. I think that would probably be a little more conducive if you had everybody working together to create little patches in between. I think they could definitely colonize it. But at the scale that we're working at, I'd probably be working on like trying to find something rural. A lot of times like predators seem to like also do well in kind of suburban-ish kind of environments. You've done a lot on that. You might have some thoughts on this actually, like, foxes, raccoons, and other mesopredators. And the biggest predators, I didn't talk about predators, but it's raccoons for nest predators. Snakes are a big nest predator. Those two are tied from research projects. And then I think Cooper's hawks are big on the adult mortality. Foxes contribute too. So Ray,
Hey, Luke.
Dr. Weil.
Ray's fine. First, I want to mention to the group that, was it last year we were at the Maryland Soybean Board together asking for money? And you did a really good job showing how valuable your deer control was. Of course, that was a different project. big problem for growers. So I work a lot with cover crops, and I'm trying to encourage farmers to let the cover crops go to bloom, pollinators, and things like that, so we could conceivably have large acreages of standing cover crops that are going to seed and blooming, things like clover. That will continue to stand when they plant soybeans into it, so you've got this sort of brushy, eventually the soybeans take over, but they're pretty good cover. I
Yeah.
see a lot of wildlife in these fields.
Yeah.
In the middle of the soybean field, so do you have any idea? Maybe not particularly for the Bobwhite, so that.
Well, I think that, yeah, I think for
Okay.
sure, like our cover crop program is great. I mean, it's like a wildlife food plot, especially if you mix in your 50%, the regulations last I looked at them were like 50% cereal, and you can have about 25% of two legumes, which like that's like my premium combo is like 50% winter wheat for your geese, 25% crimson clover for deer, gonna love that. And then
Put some brassicas in there and they're
Yeah.
all blooming
hmm
in May, and we have to kill them, but you've got this cover.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think it's a good role. And actually, for some of our so we plant fire breaks around these fields and we disc them. We're going to be planting in some of them with ragweed and partridge pea, which are natives. We're going to do some in clovers as well, because I think the clover has a certain role. It brings bugs and nice cover. So, yeah, I think there's definitely a role. Certainly way better than no cover crops when it's like a moonscape out there until they plant.
We're killing them early, we have just a little bit of
Yeah.
residue on them.
Yeah.
Do you have any data on that? I'd love to.
I don't, but
if anybody studied the
yeah.
impact of letting cover crops grow large and bloom.
Most of like the telemetry work, well, Delaware's doing some telemetry work they're starting in on, and they have some clover areas that you could probably be a pretty good mimic. They do have crops. They might have some stuff. They're Delaware, Denrec is doing
Oh.
they just started a telemetry study on
I
quail.
can get some of these acoustic pucks and put them out in our fields.
Yeah, you can find if they're there. You don't know where they are there, though, which is the
Yeah.
challenge. So like having a little GPS backpacks would be cool for really seeing are they actually in the cover crop. The other main research station is Tall Timbers, which is based in Florida, and they do a whole lot on bobwhite management. They have probably the best data sets out there too. So those would be two places I check. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Ray.
All right.
All right. Right at 4. Cool. Thank you.